Welcome back to the Secular Homeschool Revolution Podcast. I am Ashley, your host, and today we are going to discuss social justice and why you should be including it in your homeschooling journey. And as you guys know, I like to give a podcast update. I like to give a life update. So let's get into it before we get into the nitty-gritty of social justice. All right, so for my podcast episode, really quickly, I officially have over 150 listeners, so thank you. Not bad for my season 1. My episodes are averaging about 40 plays by the second week, about 20 to 25 the first week, so that's really good. Next, I just wanted to give you guys a rundown of my top 5 episodes this season because this is my last episode of season 1. I'm going to start season 2 in the end of September, beginning of October. So my 5th favorite episode or most popular episode is How to Start a Co-op. My 4th one is Connected Parenting and Homeschooling. My 3rd is homeschooling a form of activism? My 2nd most popular was Calling Secular Progressive Homeschoolers. That was my first episode with this podcast, and that episode has the most response, whether it's on my Instagram or people sending me messages on the Spotify or YouTube. So I think that really excited people because there is a space for that, and we don't talk about it enough. And my number 1 episode, drum roll, is Homeschool Schedule. So thank you guys for joining me on my first season. I told you guys I wanted to talk more about me when I do my life updates because I always talk about my kids. And while they're cool and everything, I need to get better at centering myself. Well, I'm going to talk about my daughter's birthday, but it's going to be about me. So my daughter celebrated her 8th birthday this past weekend, and she had a list of things she wanted to do. So she wanted to stay in a hotel. She wanted to try oysters for the first time. She wanted to visit the American Girl doll store and get a new doll and hang out with her cousin in Dallas. And my kids are never shy about asking for the moon and stars when it comes to their birthdays. And I love that about them. And I wouldn't say that I have spoiled or ungrateful kids because I do genuinely feel like they're incredibly appreciative. But they do fully understand the assignment when it comes to celebrating themselves. They just know how to embrace the joy, and they're not afraid to ask for what they want. And I admire that confidence. I admire their boldness and their ability to say, this is my day and I want to make it special and I deserve for it to be special. And I struggle with that. It's something that I realized it, and when you're realizing things about yourself, or at least I do, I'm like, okay. And I've been in and out of therapy, so there's some therapy support here. But I realized, growing up, birthdays felt like an inconvenience because my mom was a single parent, and I was always afraid to ask for anything because I didn't want to add stress to her plate. And that fear of being a burden definitely has stuck with me for years, and I've just never felt comfortable making a fuss over my own birthday. And as I've gotten older, and I've come to realize that my inner child celebrates her birthday through my kids. And when they have their birthdays, that joy and excitement that they have, I see that as the voice I didn't have as a kid, if that makes sense. So there's a part of me that envies them for that they get to be free in a way I never was. And I definitely think it's beautiful. And it's beautiful that I get to witness it, even if it like tears me up inside. Like, that's a place of healing for me. And last year, last year I got called out by my friends. Not called out, but definitely was seen. So my two friends, Tempe and Jen, they were, asking me, what am I going to do for my birthday? They were like, you definitely should do something for your birthday. And I pretty much just like brushed them off like, okay, yeah, we'll see. I don't feel good. I don't know. I don't feel like doing nothing. I'm tired, blah, 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 blah. And my friend Tempe, she called me out, and I really haven't talked to her about it, but she called me out and she said, do you struggle with celebrating yourself? Y'all. I'm like, well, damn, she's a really good friend. She saw that in me. And I was like, she has a whole lot of audacity. And even in that moment when she said that, I was like, no, I mean, it's not, But it wasn't easy for me to admit, but she definitely was spot on. I just don't want to inconvenience anyone. I don't want to add anything to anybody's to-do list. So, and also, I have celebrated my birthday a couple of times. So, me and another friend, her birthday is 2 days before mine, and we just pulled up Google and was like, where's a cheap flight to go? And we ended up doing a girls trip to Chicago in November. And it ended up being a wild trip. We partied on the South Side, had nothing but great experiences. She even got a tattoo by a guy who was starring or was on a VH1 tattoo show, reality show. We stayed out till like 5-6 o'clock in the morning. It was an all around just like crazy good time. But while I was having this crazy good time, I had a lot of guilt. And it was definitely a feeling that I just couldn't shake. Like I was being selfish, like I was taking up too much space. Like, how dare I? I left my husband with my kids. Like, it was a whole thing. And I didn't get to fully just like and be in the moment. And even like a couple years ago, I told my husband, I love road trips, like more than a plane. Like, I love a good road trip. I like the snacks. I like all the stops. I like to see all the things. I like to, detours. Like I really love an unplanned road trip. My husband does not like an unplanned road trip. And when I say unplanned, I mean, like, I don't stick hard to the schedule. Like, if I see a random like historical site, I want to stop and I want to go look. Or if it's like an antique shop, I want to stop and go look. And my husband's very like, oh, that's not on the schedule. We're not going to get here on time. Okay, but that's here nor there. So anyway, so we go on this road trip. I told him I want to go to Moab, Utah. So we go to Moab, and it's a road trip. So I know I wanted to go, but I got to be honest. I got in my own way a little bit on my birthday and frustrated him. So we like bumped heads a little bit, but it was a me problem and not a him problem. Because I felt like I was taking up too much space. So I was like, no, I can drive. You don't have to drive. Or, we don't have to stop here. We don't have to do that. And this. And he was like, I got it. Chill out, relax. And I definitely was not chilling out or relaxing, but it was me just shoveling through this anxiety and guilt that I was having. And I didn't know how to necessarily communicate that to him. So I communicated to him that my birthday's coming up in November. It is time for a change, and I want to celebrate it this year with friends and no guilt. And it doesn't even have to be anything too wild. Like, I literally think meeting me for coffee on my birthday would be amazing. I think it's definitely the right step in the right direction. And honestly, it's a little scary for me to even ask someone to want to have birthday coffee with me. But it feels right. Like, I know I deserve this. I know I need to give myself permission, and I need to stick with my mantra to take up space. So before we get into the social justice topic of the day, I want to say here's to celebrating our kids, our inner child, and ourselves. And if you're like me and you've struggled with feeling like you deserve a celebration, I hope you find a way to embrace it this year. And if your birthday's already passed, plan for next year, or you can do an impromptu birthday. Like, if your birthday was in February, celebrate it in October, celebrate it in November. There's no rules, right? But no matter how old we are, we all definitely deserve to feel special for who we are. All right, so now let's get into our topic of the day, the importance of incorporating social justice into your homeschooling journey. So, what is social justice parenting, and why should we incorporate it in our homeschooling journey? Well, social justice parenting is about raising kids to be aware of the inequalities in the world and encouraging them to take action to make things better. It's about teaching them values and reinforcing those values of empathy, fairness, and the courage to stand up for what's right, because sometimes that can be hard, and we want to equip them with the right tools to be able to stand up and stand tall. And when we're talking about social justice in the context of parenting, we're not just talking about raising kind kids who are nice to everyone. And while we all would like kind kids who are nice to everyone, and that's a good start, we're talking more about helping them understand the big picture. Like, things exist like racism, sexism, poverty, homophobia, and just other forms of injustices. And, them being able to whip out them tools so they can handle the situation. And when we're incorporating it into our homeschooling, we do realize we're not just teaching our kids math and science. Like, we're teaching them how to be good humans. And a part of being a good human is understanding the struggles that others face, and we should do our part to make things better. And when we're weaving in social justice, we're helping raise a generation that's not only smart, but they are kind, and they're empathetic, and they're ready to stand up for what's right. We definitely need to be intentional in the way that we examine history, because we need to peel back layers to get a fuller picture, especially if you don't use a curriculum. For years, I didn't use anything like Blossom and Root or Torchlight or Mint and Bloom. I created my own, and I would take the narratives and then look at how they're explaining it and then give voices to other perspectives. So we need to make sure that we look at the mainstream narrative and understand that it comes from white dominant culture, and it's our responsibility to explore and include diverse perspectives. And this means that we're going to have to do a little work sometimes. We're going to have to actively seek out stories and voices from marginalized people who have been silent since the start of time. And that's really going to give us a true social justice focused approach in homeschooling. And that's going to be the key. That's what's going to make us, or that's really going to be the defining moment makes us like secular homeschoolers and secular progressive homeschoolers. Traditionally, secular homeschoolers don't include that social justice component. It's just the they don't include religion in their homeschooling journey. And when we amplify these voices, we're not only giving our kids a richer, more accurate understanding of the world, but we're also just challenging the biases and omissions of the dominant historical narratives. And it's going to create a more inclusive view of history that acknowledges and respects all contributions and experiences. And our kids are going to grow up and they're going to talk about it and they're going to challenge people and they're going to, again, it starts with a small seed that's going to grow and grow and grow, but we have to give them access to this information. Some books that I'd like to offer you guys, because I can tell you need to do this, but I also would like to offer some resources that you could integrate into your homeschooling. So for lower elementary, which would be kindergarten to second, Last Stop on Market Street by Matt de la Peña. So I like that this book discusses economic diversity. And when you lay that on the table, economic diversity, a lot of people would think, how does a kid who is 5 digest that? This book is just a beautiful picture book that introduces the theme of empathy and community for the kids to understand economic diversity and the importance of seeing beauty in our differences. I definitely think like kids younger see it, but they don't know how to name it or fully understand it or what to call it. And this is a good conversation starter for that. The next book is The Colors of Us by Karen Katz. I like this book because it's the way that they discuss skin color in such a positive way. And I know that there's been conversation where like kids don't see skin color at a young age. They most definitely do. And I think this book's a good cheerleader on encouraging them to appreciate the diversity of the world around them. Again, that book is The Color of Us by Karen Katz. Okay, my second book recommendation is Sit-In, How 4 Friends Stood Up by Sitting Down by Andrea Davis Pinkney. And this book talks about the Woolworths lunch counter sit-ins during the civil rights movement. And it's good. It's a really great book to talk about peaceful protests and how impactful they can be and the importance of activism. And if you are one of those people who get to travel a lot during your homeschooling journey, the museum in Greensboro, North Carolina, it's called the International Civil Rights Center and Museum, has the counters displayed there, and they have like video and sound of all the awful things that were said to them and like pictures. My husband went, he had a work trip out there and he got to experience it and it brought him to tears. So hopefully we get to road trip up that way before the year's out. That is a goal of mine because he said it was just a beautiful museum. It was well curated. But this is one of those things where you could take a deep dive into the book and then go learn about the actual experience. And it could be so impactful. The next book, I was talking to my husband about this list, and this is for middle school. He loves Joel Parker Rhodes, and I talked about it in my last episode, but Ghost Boys by her. This book has all the things. It talks about racism, police violence, those who've lost to injustices, and it really hones in the point of systemic racism. He said that he didn't think, or he couldn't think of, I couldn't think either of any books that really were intentional about systemic racism. So that is a new term you could introduce using this book and exploring what that is and how that looks like, especially like if you're looking at laws like on a state and local level, you could take a deep dive that way. The next book is Stamped: Racism, Anti-Racism in You by Jason Reynolds. This is a remix. Okay, so Ibram X. Kendi has a book that's called Stamped from the Beginning. And this Stamped Racism, Anti-Racism in You is like an adaptation for younger readers. So I think that maybe closer to 8th grade, but I think it's a good book that helps you understand the history of racism in America and how it continues to shape our world. It's one of those books that really say that in order to see where we're going in the future, you have to understand our past. And it has a good foundation of laying it out brick by brick. And I don't think that it's in an aggressive, overwhelming way. I think it's well written. I'm not going to say it's easy. It's not an easy read because of the topic, but it doesn't feel, sometimes when you're reading these books, the language can feel too high level, and they did a really good job at keeping the vocabulary simple for a middle school reader. For my high school list, I did have to lean on my husband a little bit. He has experience of teaching high school and doing workshops with high schoolers. He recommended Just Mercy, a story of justice and redemption by Brian Stevenson. And this is a memoir. Again, it has been adapted for, high school level readers. And this talks about Brian Stevenson's work. So if you're not familiar, you could find articles to discuss it before you dive into the book or while you're in the book. And he started the Equal Justice Initiative, and that explores the justice system and the fight against wrongful convictions. And even so, say if you have I think another book that I don't know if it's too baby for high schoolers, but it is the Zoe Washington, because it does tell the story of her dad who was wrongly convicted, and she was having at a young age having to navigate the justice system when all of these adults were just saying, well, that's the system, it's not going to change. She was motivated to change it. And so, yeah, I think that would be appropriate for middle school, and Just Mercy, a story of justice and redemption by Brian Stevenson for high school. The next book is The Hate U Give. He felt like this is a really relevant book. We read it with Parker, but it's contemporary. It's very relevant to the police violence and the Black Lives Matter movements that kids are familiar with today. And it really does help think critically about justice and, different roles for advocating for change. And if you, want to read it, then you can double back with the movie, and have more discussions about advocacy and the importance of movements like the Civil Rights Movement, like Black Lives Matter movement. There's a lot of different ways you could navigate the discussion. So the next part is about me addressing parents. I want to first address white parents who want to raise socially conscious kids, who, are for social justice and want to become effective allies. A book that I would recommend is Me and White Supremacy by Layla F. Saad. This is actually a workbook, and this will definitely help you understand, hold yourself accountable, and combat your own internalized racism and your biases. And I think you would have to, you always have to do the work. And I also think people who are biracial, who weren't raised by necessarily their Black parent or their Black mama, should use this workbook as well. I, was raised more by my Latina mom, and there definitely were things I had to address. But I think this workbook, it's raw. It's going to make you undress yourself and think, when you thought you were being a good ally, a good person, in the space, it might hurt your feelings. But you gotta, like, if you wanna be in these spaces and you want to do the work and you're committed to the change, you have to be committed to that accountability, that vulnerability, that this book is going to offer you. And it's one of those things where a lot of times white liberals, because I'm assuming if you're white and you're liberal and you're progressive, that's why you're listening to this podcast, sometimes can be problematic because they are in the space with their biases and oftentimes themselves silence the people of color in the space, like that they know better, and it ends up not visiting, but ends up turning into like this white savior complex. And even though you mean well, it doesn't help that you're not supporting and amplifying those voices who are being directly affected. And this book, Me and White Supremacy by Layla F. Saad, is going to help you identify that. Because, some people think that, oh my gosh, the white savior complex isn't a thing. Like, some people think white privilege isn't a thing. You guys, this is off topic and it's sort of on topic, but I have such like a beef, and I saw a TikTok come up on my For You page about it, but I have such an issue with like the Ron Clark Academy. They've gone viral. He's a white school leader, and he definitely thinks that playing hip hop is being culturally relevant, and it's not. And so a lot of their viral videos, the kids are like dancing and all of these things, and it really doesn't have anything to do with like their educational, the quality of education that they're getting. And I think you can educate kids of color without doing the latest dance, and only ingraining them, only making culturally relevant material available to them with hip hop. I think there's so much more to the Black experience, because this school is like predominantly Black, that you could offer these kids. But that's me on my soapbox. But yeah, I definitely have a bone to pick with him. So you don't have to join me on my soapbox if you don't want to, but check out Me and White Supremacy by Layla F. Saad. The book that inspired the topic for today about social justice it's a book I just finished last week, but it's Social Justice Parenting by Dr. Tracy Baxley. And she's a woman of color. She's a mom of 5. And sometimes I feel like some parenting books can come off very like parent shaming, or they can come off like, I know everything, you absolutely know nothing. And I didn't get that feeling from this book. I actually felt like it was a very real, very grounded approach that she took. It was just relatable. The conversations that she shares, you're like, oh, I've had that with my kid, or I've had that experience with my kid. And I love all the strategies she offers. So like, for example, if you're reading a book or watching a show, you can ask your kids, how are different characters experiencing the world differently? Do you think it's based on their background or their skin color? Or why do you think this character was treated this way? And that'll help build their critical thinking and empathy. And I think she does a good job and explains why having these conversations sets a strong foundation for a social justice education at home. And like I said, that's a really good example where you don't necessarily have to be a homeschooler, but because, homeschoolers aren't the only ones that watch TV, but you could build out that information, the same thing that it can be applied to in a book and in a story. Like, why was this character this way? Or we see this same type of character over and over again, and they're this color. Um, I know for my kids, what is it? The Descendants. We are constantly having these conversations, and my daughter was like, well, why are the black girls in Descendants the evil ones, right? Because like Uma was evil, and like the main villain, like they were villains, right? But she was the main villain. And then what is the other girl? She was Puerto Rican and she wanted the prince. Well, she ended up being evil. And like my kids, we've had the discussions that a lot of Puerto Ricans are descendants from Africa. And she looks very like, I think she looks, you could see it, her African features. And so they saw it too, because I think they think she favors them in the way that their skin and their hair look. So they identified her as a black character. And they're like, well, why were they the evil ones in the storylines? And that started a conversation for us. And so you can, I think it starts with having those little conversations about things that they see, things that they watch. So when they get older, they'll be able to say when they see it, they know how to name it and they know how to address it. A lot of times, because even as adults, when we see things, sometimes it can be hard to call it out when we see it, or we almost feel shamed not to speak about it. I know in our parent group, we had some new families come in, and we were at a park day and we were just discussing, because they were from up north and they're talking about their experience here in Texas. And they expressed it felt good to have other people to talk about it, to talk about their trauma. But they didn't feel comfortable, addressing it when things happen to them out in public. It's even as like small things. If, a white person's coming down the sidewalk, they felt obligated to move out of their way. And it's crazy, you have to wait till you find safe people to talk about it, because you don't think that a person who doesn't have a similar lived experience as you would understand it and offer you empathy. So check out Social Justice Parenting by Dr. Tracy Baxley. The next thing I want to talk about really quickly is when we're raising allies, we need to make sure we're raising them without falling into that white savior complex. Because, we know we just don't want them to position themselves as heroes in the fight against racism or injustice. And we know that's a fine line, but it's about teaching our kids to listen. We need to help them understand that being an ally means taking a back seat and following the lead of those who are impacted by the injustice, right? So you're going to encourage your kids to just listen to the BIPOC voices and to learn from them. And most of all, support their causes in ways that are respectful and meaningful. And they need to also understand that being an advocate is not about them, and it's not for their ego. It's not about like the credit or the Instagram pictures and hashtags. It's not about them feeling good about themselves, but about doing what's right, even when no one's watching or seeing it. And this is where the work as parents that you do, like the me and white supremacy, will pay off, because this will help you model that mindset, and your kids will most likely adopt it for themselves. Okay, the last segment that I'm going to do is the importance of listening to the BIPOC community. And this goes hand in hand for community activism, calling out injustices, raising allies, because the best way we can learn about someone else's experience is to hear it directly from them. And encourage your kids to read books, watch documentaries, and follow social media accounts that center BIPOC voices. And it's not just about learning, but it's about letting those voices guide our actions, whether it's deciding which causes to support or which books to read or how to engage in activism. listening to the BIPOC community should always be your first step. And that is a wrap for this episode in season 1 of the Secular Homeschool Revolution Podcast. I am so glad you guys joined me today, and I hope you got a full understanding of the importance of incorporating social justice in your progressive homeschooling journey. I hope it inspired and motivated you. I hope you check out those books. And remember, it's not about being perfect or having all the answers, but it is about being intentional and listening and raising kids who are ready to make the world a better place. If you found this episode helpful, please share it with your friends, leave a review on, Spotify, or like a video on YouTube. And as always, I love to chat with you guys because we are building a secular progressive homeschool community on my Instagram, secular_homeschool_revolution. And until next time, keep questioning, keep growing, and keep revolutionizing your homeschooling journey.